So you go from essentially having just an application to an application with all its dependencies spun up that can be reproduced pretty much anywhere without any sort of config that you define yourself, right? And so that's kind of the magic moment, and that's what we're working towards like right now.
Hello, welcome to the devtools-fm podcast. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey everyone, our guest today is Jake Cooper. Jake is the founder of Railway.app. Jake, really excited to have you on. Before we dig in and start talking about Railway, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Jake. Been an engineer for almost 10 years now. Just like started writing out C++ hobby kind of hack scripts for random FPS video games and then some sort of TF2 backpack scrapers when I was like maybe 13 or 14. And so evolved rapidly over the time there. I went from Visual Basic, started writing jQuery, and then I worked at Wolfram briefly while I was in college, worked remotely, did a very, very brief stint in finance in New York, moved there. I was out within 5 months, realized that it was not my vibe. And then I worked very probably for about 18 months on the jump bikes and scooters at Uber. Had a friend who was like part of the acquiring team over there and was like, we have this really crappy Ruby on Rails app and it needs to like go to like a nice like distributed systems like Go microservice mesh. And I was like, cool, that sounds wonderful. I had done a nice chunk of that for a bunch of distributed systems projects in college and always found them like really, really interesting. So I went out there with a team of people and kind of scaled that whole thing out, started building the provider integration platforms. You started integrating with like scooter companies and bike companies and Lime. And like I flew to Paris to do all that stuff. And then Uber shelved the whole thing and sold it to Lime and then canned a bunch of us. And so I asked to be fired because I was like, I'm done with this. And so I walked away from that. And then, so that took us to Railway. And then I just started fiddling on a bunch of stuff and just constantly needed some sort of piece of infrastructure that I thought would be easier. And as a little bit of background, Railway is a platform that we've created just over a year ago now that makes it really, really easy to use infrastructure. So we give you a canvas where you can just espouse into existence whatever you would like, right? When you say, I want Postgres, I want to deploy this application, I want whatever, and we will go figure out how to make it live and running for you. So yeah, that's a bit about me and a bit about Railway.
So the idea for Railway really came from this like previous experience of building apps and like not wanting to think so much about infrastructure, especially if you're distributed systems sort of apps?
Yeah, exactly. It came from this experience of not wanting to have to deal with it. And so, of course, what we did was we like built our entire persona around it and probably we'll spend the next 10 years of our lives dealing with it. So I guess we kind of just like flipped the version there, but we realized it was like way too hard for everybody, even the people who were kind of like already doing it, right? And when I was like, after I left Uber, I was like, I just need a Postgres instance. I just need something like just, and it was basically like this endpoint that I hit that would just like spin up a container and then give me a Postgres instance on a port, and I would be away to my races and I could go and build my application.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic for me. I've seen this throughout jobs that I've had in the industry where infrastructure generally becomes a role of like everybody's responsibility. It's like you have like an infrastructure team or a platform team and they own it and it's like all small and neat. And then they're like, oh wait, we have too much work. Now we want everybody to be able to do this. And now everybody's like editing Kubernetes YAML and trying to figure out like how to stitch all this stuff together. And it gets pretty gnarly. So how is Railway's approach different? You said, you have a canvas and you can like sort of make stuff, but like, what does it look like in your day to day?
Yeah. So our day to day is like figuring out how people can not interact with these interfaces as frequently as possible, right? Like we don't want people to deal with kubeyaml. We don't want you to deal with nginx config. We don't want you to deal with any of this stuff, right? Like what we want you to do is be able to focus on your application layer and us to be able to infer via kind of just like magic detection, whatever your kind of dependencies are, where this thing should kind of land, like what its kind of resources constraints should be, right? And we should be able to have like a best guess approximation on like, yeah, this thing is reasonably live, right? Like instead of having this kind of like mountain of YAML where you have to define everything up front, we really try and take like that mountain of YAML and make it post haste, right? Like, so the ideal in modern DevOps is you have this wall of YAML that you have to get right off the first bat, and you play basically like YAML battleship where you slide this YAML into the door and then it gets slid back and says random esoteric error, and you're like, shit, right? And for us, we basically just wanted to like go and push that back and basically be like, all right, cool, just change it whenever you kind of want. We'll modify these configs for you, and then we'll kind of like redeploy this thing as needed,
So as a user of Railway, are you using it mostly through the GUI of like Railway? Because you do have this like visual canvas experience where you can like see your sort of like services together in the canvas, or is it through also through configuration, or is it a bit of both depending on what your needs are?
Yeah, so we have the canvas obviously, and then we also have the command line, which allows you to run all of this stuff locally, right? So it would take your entire project config and it would allow you to kind of like hook into either an instance that already exists inside of the cloud or fork an instance and run everything you need locally, right? So you could do Railway shell or Railway run, and then would drop you into kind of like an active instance inside of your application layer code that you might just have. It's in Git, gets pulled down, it gets built, it gets automatically detected with the exact same config that you would have remotely, right? And all of that config is like, it's not stored in a repository, it's not stored in anything like that. We just keep track of the infrastructure as code for all of the underlying principles. And this is super neat because it basically means you can kind of like solve the n+1 problem where you would have like a monorepo as well as like another dependency that you want to add, right? And so if this is kind of like your current org status or case where you're like, oh cool, I want to integrate this external dependency, you kind of have to like take this dependency from its repository and like shoehorn it into your monorepo, and then you essentially like break this dependency kind of like link. And with Railway, we can just like keep track of all of these pointers as just kind of like distributed pointers as to where they exist when everybody are kind of authors onto this thing. We can hook into that kind of like deployment lifecycle management engine.
So how does like is there any comparable services to Railway for our viewers that or listeners that might not be as infrastructure heavy? Is it kind of like Heroku or Render?
Yeah. So it is like we were heavily inspired by Heroku. Like that's one of the first tools like a lot of us use to like just go and get something up and running. And so for like on the surface, it's very, very similar to Heroku, right? Like if you want to get something up and running, whether it's a database, whether it's an application or anything like that, we will help you get it up and running, right? And that is kind of generally our pitch for companies and teams who want to move extremely quickly, right? But the long tail of this problem is actually it's really on that kind of like dependency lifecycle management, right? And so like as we kind of grow, our aim is actually for us not to be competitive with Roku. It's actually to be competitive with Terraform, right? And so you essentially can keep this desired state that you currently have, and then or this current state that you currently have, and then desired state. And as you kind of like use the dashboard as this compiler, you will essentially espouse into existence that config, and we will go and reconcile the state underneath for you, right? So on the surface, it looks a lot like competing with Roku, but the ideal long term is the dependency management kind of Terraform layer, which like I don't think fundamentally exists for kind of most things. And so it's kind of like a really interesting place to be because you're kind of pitching this thing that like people know is like really interesting and like and it will help you kind of on your development journey. But your current best approximation is most of these tools like Render and Heroku, where it's like, okay, cool, we'll just figure out production, right? Like that's what we kind of get up and running. Your development environment, that's totally up to you. And then like, if you want a Flask app, go find a Flask app from like GitHub, right? We see Railway as kind of this universal memo where you can just like yank things from it. And anytime anybody has deployed or built something, you should be able to yank that as a dependency that you can start using, right? And also keep track of that dependency, right? So you don't need to like clone or fork or any like pull down this stuff and then you've kind of like lost this pointer in the world and you lose that dependency. Like we should be able to track that, and we should be able to like push all of those like downstream changes, right? And they should echo and kind of ripple out in the same way that you would have like packages. You can have like packages as infrastructure.
Interesting. So this gets into your sort of like one of your catchphrases is like infrastructure as Legos. It's like trying to get these prepackaged pieces and then compose them into something, right? What might that like? Can we get a little bit more of a concrete example of like how you might use that maybe with a Flask app or something? It's like, how does it simplify building out?
Yeah, sure. And so like let's say you have an API server and like a database, right? And so those are basically what we call atoms, right? And so there's like the core, most like low level building block that you would want to build, right? And so you would say, I want a Postgres instance and I want to deploy this like Flask app somewhere, right? And then if you had built something that somebody wanted to depend on, right? Like the evolution of this ends up being something like PostHog, right? So you add like Redis on top of it, you add this other thing, you start authoring it to the community, right? And people start to depend on it and they're like, how do I deploy this on-prem? How do I go and manage this, right? Like since Railway understands how to deploy Postgres and how to deploy Redis and how to deploy Docker files, you can essentially build up these like Legos that can now be composed together, right? And if you say, cool, I want a version of PostHog, then we can say, let's get you the latest version of PostHog that ever ran. We'll go grab that as a dependency. And as PostHog authors new things and says, we're going to move to Postgres 14, right? Or we're going to we're going to swap Redis out with like Memcached or like some others, or not Memcached. I just pushed etcd and memcache together. Long day. But anyway, they swap it out with another memcache. You can actually keep track of these dependencies over time. And if people will create the like backfills required for any of these things, you can fork into a parallel environment, backfill everything, and then go evolve this over time, right? And in that sense, it keeps track of this dependency so that you don't necessarily need these kind of DevOps people in the loop that say they like, oh, there's like breaking changes here, or oh, cool, like what are the kind of like ramifications on any of these like downstream dependencies? In the same way that you get those package dependencies, you can now get those infrastructure dependencies, right? So long as you have the input required and you push it through that application and it deploys successfully, you have that dependency.
That's really cool. So was there ever like, as you're building this, I mean, it sounds like an incredibly complicated thing to achieve, especially if you're talking about like sort of figuring out easy infrastructure migrations. That's not an easy thing to do. That's not a trivial thing to do by any means. So are there like any features of Railway that you'd say that you're most proud of, or maybe something that's just given you like a real aha moment, or given your users like a real like, this is it, you know?
Yeah. So I would say that there's like a couple of things here and they tie into each other, right? So the canvas is neat because like most people, when they think about like service dependencies or anything like that, they think of this kind of like brick of YAML and anything like that. And this allows you to kind of just like espouse it into existence and say, okay, cool, this now exists here, right? And so that's kind of a nice aha moment because you can worry about the networking, you can worry about any of this other stuff later, right? But the really cool thing that I'm super excited about that we didn't get to chat about kind of last time in our initial first chat was this thing called Nix packs. And so we're essentially using Nix to rebuild the Heroku build packs, which if you're not familiar with this, I mean, you're in the audience, the Heroku build packs are kind of this like magic amalgam of bash scripts that say like, go get these dependencies if you have this thing here, right? And so we are essentially rebuilding this and we're going to move this out of beta because it's doing super well on the platform on next Monday. And it basically is this kind of like Rust engine that goes and it analyzes application dependencies to bootstrap the dependencies required to create a container so that your application will run in it, right? And so this is a really fun aha moment because the magic of Heroku is that you just kind of give it your code and it like runs, right? And so we tried to figure out a way that we could actually build this in as a composable thing where we could start adding things like provider caching, right? So if you look at a lot of really cool tools that kind of came out recently, like you look at Turbo Repo, you know, Bazel is obviously an older tool with a lot more config, but like a lot of these things kind of define ways to like do caching, right? And if we can define this as general thing, like we're going to give you a magic pocket drive in space that actually shows up, you put your node modules in it, and then when you go and rebuild this again, you have those node modules again, right? And so now we can essentially define ways to go and grab those dependencies and say, if you are building a Django app, you actually need these two dependencies, right? But if you're building a Django app with Postgres, you actually need GCC. So we're going to go fetch that as well, right? And we can read that as your requirements.json. And since it's all like, we've got like these libraries for just like building with Rust, like it's really easy for us to like go and add those logic and add those providers and then add any of those things and essentially just map over these and grab all of this amalgam of dependencies, right? Which allows us to automatically bootstrap the container, which allows us to kind of carry that magic forward and do a lot of really, really neat stuff with it. And then that actually extends on like platform levels where you say, okay, cool, you have a Django application, but this environment doesn't have Postgres, right? Can I go and bootstrap a Postgres environment, generate all the keys required based off like a kind of like generator encoded environment variable that says like either go fetch this environment variable or this is how you would generate a Postgres kind of like database. Go kind of like grab that memo and then pipe it in and then spin up that Postgres database. So you go from essentially having just an application to an application with all its dependencies spun up that can be reproduced pretty much anywhere without any sort of config that you define yourself, right? And so that's kind of the magic moment, and that's what we're working towards like right now.
Yeah, that seems like magic. Just like analyze the code, know what to do without any config. Like fire infrastructure guy, right?
And it's obviously not that, right? It's a long tail of like go grab these dependencies, but you know, for people who come to the programming realm or people who are not familiar with DevOps or people like anybody who's just like not kind of gone through what I call is like the DevOps trough of sorrow of learning Cube, learning Docker, learning all of these other things so that you can deploy your kind of like node app. It's really awesome because like basically they don't have to deal with that until they want to kind of eject and go and be like, okay, actually, how does this actually work under the hood, right? Or how do I extend this so that it's, you know, we had somebody in the community where they were like, hey, I imported the Canvas package, but it needs like some WebGL stuff. And then they just like made a PR into here and was like, if I import this package, go grab the WebGL stuff, right? And then it just worked, right? And that you can create this kind of like whirlwind kind of network tailwind where people are just adding these things and you can grab this like massive dependency graph. So it'll be super interesting and it's definitely a long tail thing, but yeah.
Yeah, these platforms are really fascinating. Is there, I mean, are you really relying a lot on like context specific understanding of dependencies? So for example, understanding a gem file or a package.json or, whatever other, your requirements your requirements file in a Python project, like whatever you may be, to be able to like pull in these dependencies. I heard you say Nix pack, which Nix sounding like the Linux distro that's like very modular and like
Yes.
sort of like breaks things down. I mean,
Yes.
Is it using some sort of magic under the hood to figure out like what the dependencies are, or is it like very programmatic and like we're going to look at your project and sort of figure things out?
Yeah, it's very programmatic of like looking at the project and basically being like, if you have, Django, then we need to go check at like your Django apps like setting.py to see like where the like what the engine is for your thing. And if it's Postgres, then we can go and grab this, right? But you can encode that logic since like everything is just like you either need the package or you don't, right? And so if you just end up with dupes, you can just flatten and compress and you're still fetching those packages, right? And since it's Nix, everything is like cacheable and reproducible, right? So you're fetching these things. And so if the build cache is basically hot or somebody's fetched this before, it's really fast to end up rebuilding these things, right? And once we throw in those provider caching things, like people can write into their providers when they're going and doing like, a yarn provider or an npm provider or a pnpm provider, and they can reuse sections of this code because it's not like a bash script like the old Heroku kind of build packs. It's like, okay, cool. Like I actually wrote a function for like going fetching and grabbing everything and putting it into node modules, right? Like that's like one single call that you can just reuse across like pnpm, npm, yarn, anything like that, right? So you can get this like really programmatic kind of like tailwind that you just like you get with code, right? So it's super sweet.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like as a front end developer, anytime I've had to go anywhere near a Docker file or a bash script, I'm just like, oh God, like, oh, this isn't what I do. I need something to help me. So having a tool that can do it automatically just seems like the obvious next step.
Yeah, right. And it's as obvious as it is difficult on
Yeah.
these things, So yeah, but I'm cautiously optimistic because I think that we're really on a good pace here. So
when we were talking initially, we had a call before we did the podcast. But one of the things that we had talked about, and one of the things that I think is very true, is that as an industry, we've come to understand that like infrastructure needs to be more reliable, more programmatic, reproducible. Reproducibility is like really important, and a lot of the tools that we have these days are complicated. I mean, like if anybody has ever dealt with Kubernetes, like it's a challenge. It's a lot to learn. It's non-trivial. Kubernetes is an amazing project and it does a lot of things, but there's a lot of conversations that happens in teams. Is like, do we actually need Kubernetes? Do we need the things that this provides? And it's a real question that people have to hit because just the learning curve and the complexity. So I'm excited for tools like Railway that are like giving teams alternatives to be able to do that. It's like, I want to be able to spin up an app quickly. I want it to be reliable. I want things to work together really well, like be able to add new infrastructure, have different types of environments, and not have to worry about like, I don't know, a kube config.
Yeah, right. And like everybody says like kube is very difficult, and it is, and it's very unapproachable and people don't like it. But then when you get into like the whole kind of other realm of like Chef and Ansible and Puppet and making sure that all these things are idempotent and reproducible and kind of all of these things, and you're running on like your production host infrastructure, right? And so like any change that you're kind of doing there is like very like it feels like we should have better tooling, right? And Cube is kind of that one next step, but unfortunately it's just still not as accessible because like you said, Andrew, like anytime you pull open a Docker config as somebody who mostly like writes React stuff, it's like, what the am I doing with this, right? Like it's a lot. You have to understand the file system. You have to understand fetching dependencies. You have to understand like if you want to make a Docker build that doesn't take like 8 minutes to run, you have to understand like how to build like layers out of these things, right? It's frankly a lot to ask for a lot of people, and I think we just need better tools on all of these things.
So does Railway like also make it easy to like you said, like fork things? So if I want to have like multiple different M's, it's like just a click of a button and it handles the whole infrastructure for me?
Yeah, so we do that right out of the gate, right? And so we can actually even allow you to define fork config overrides. And I keep calling them this, and our product designer is like has a really good name for it that I just keep forgetting. But essentially it's whenever you fork an environment, you can take M's, like environment variables, and then basically say like, this is a staging environment, right? Like pipe in the staging environment, pipe in the staging stripe key, like override these things, right? And it makes it super trivial. So like whenever you want to fork any of these things, it goes and it has a look at the fork overrides. Anytime it kind of like crosses that window, it moves all of it, like will override those M's, and then you just start using it, right? If those M's don't necessarily exist, like it's like, hey, I need a database URL, right? We're spinning that up, right? Because we already know that there's a Postgres instance, right? So we do all of that, right? And it's super nice because you get a full copy and clone of your infrastructure. You just like run your initial kind of like migrate scripts, and then your kind of databases, if you have SQL databases, they're kind of up and running. And then you can just do whatever, right? And then the ideal here is like potentially over time we can allow you to kind of maybe cherry pick some data from production or something like that. But that's a little whiles out. It's kind of like on the data migration stuff we talked about earlier when you're going for those dependencies. It's very, very hairy. But hey, wouldn't it be nice, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Does I guess semi-related. So does Railway handle auto scaling like based on traffic on usage? Is that something that you can configure?
Yeah. So our ideal here is that you don't have to tweak as many kind of like knobs at all, right? And this is obviously kind of a North Star here. So there's going to be knobs that you generally need to tweak, and we're in the process of exposing them. So we handle auto scaling up to a point, right? And so we can vertically scale up these instances, and we can start like locking these clusters and doing stuff like that. But there comes a point at which like, there's only so much you can fit on kind of a specific box, right? And so we have basically like lines that say like, hey, listen, you're going to run into something here, right? This is kind of the end of the auto scaling, right? And so that's kind of what we do, right? Is allow you to kind of spin up these things and give you kind of like a best fit auto scaling, and then ideally you'll get kind of alerts as you're kind of like approaching that, and ideally saying like, hey, listen, in 4 days your database is going to run out of memory. You may want to like have a look at this, and we're in the process of building a lot more kind of like intelligent alerting on top of that, right? So that's kind of how the auto scaling works right now. And in the future, will allow you to kind of like define how many replicas you want, how many whatevers, like where you want to run this thing, kind of things like that. And then as you kind of add more config, we can do more things, right? But with just kind of the baseline amount of stuff, where we can do a best fit as we do kind of currently.
Yeah, that's awesome. Platform maturity here is kind of key. Just like shipping something early. Often shipping something around infrastructure is really hard generally, because you're not using like Kubernetes or something under the hood. You've got a lot of like custom code here that you're like hooking up to make all this plumbing work. So,
yeah.
I mean, speaking of custom code, I mean, we've said it a few times, infrastructure is really, really hard. And this is such an interesting area of the industry to get into. So given your experience now, what's the hardest technical problem that y'all have had to solve at Railway?
Well, I can tell you about one that we are talking about today, and it's what happens when you run out of IPv4s. And so essentially, we model the entire network across everything, and we allocate, an internal IPv4 for all of these things, right? And once you get into like dependencies that spawn other dependencies and like those subnets, you need to allocate those things, or you need to like create subnets for them, right? So just even the network management and the topology there, like, is really, really hard to lay out in a way that's like, okay, cool. Can you give somebody like true tenant isolation here and handle a lot of that stuff? A lot of the stuff we do is like, it's hard in terms of engineering because like, we're handling a decent scale at a decent rate, at a decent clip, and you're doing a lot of that stuff. But a lot of it is like very foresightful in terms of like, okay, we got to read a bunch of papers because like people don't do this stuff, right? Like a lot of the stuff that we're doing is like, you kind of even just run out of papers, and you're like, oh shit, like we're really in the deep here, right? And so like the technical problems end up being more kind of like, how can you take the tools that you currently have to kind of like best fit onto the experience that you really want, and kind of like track a lot of the really cool stuff coming, right? Like there's a lot of really cool stuff coming down the pipe from like the eBPF perspective that like we will be able to use, right? And there's a lot of cool stuff coming down the pipe for like Kubernetes with like, like the virtual kubelet stuff that recently came out, IPv4 v6 multiplexing, stuff like that, right? And so we're constantly on this edge of like trying to like walk this line and be like, okay, like, if it's going to take us this long to go and do this, like, hey, can we line it up with this timeline? Is that timeline going to shift? And so there's a lot of really like hard problems in there, but a lot of it is like really just like playing with the tools that you kind of have, right? And you're like, I have this hand of cards, like how do I play it this time, right? How do I make sure that we get the like v0 out that it'll work for all of these things? And how do we make sure that we plan that like when we do the v1, we're going to be able to like backfill for all of this stuff, right? And so it just becomes this like massive like matrix that you're constantly trying to like navigate.
Yeah, it sounds like you're truly on like the bleeding edge of this tech. You can tell you're doing something new when there's no more papers to read about it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? You're like, oh man, okay, all right.
Yeah, you know it's a hard problem when you have to start reaching for papers to begin with. It's like, oh wait, well, look, is there research to this? And then once you're like run out of research, you're like, oh well, huh?
Yeah,
Let's write our own papers.
yeah. And then you catch yourself emailing people on the Borg or the Tupperware paper, and you're like, hey, I know you alluded to this random thing that like we think is really important that you did not cover at all. Do you have any thoughts here? And sometimes they respond, and sometimes they don't respond. So, yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's step back and think about future land. So you've been working on railway for a while and you get it to the point where you want it. It's just like sort of met the vision that you have for it. What does it look like? What does it do?
It is runs anywhere, just in time dependency, just in time compute for software. It makes everything so much easier. Ideally, you just wave a wand and you say, I want this, and those dependencies are reconciled all the way down the tree. When new updates are pushed, all of those things and pointers actually go and push into a queue that you can go and manage yourself, or ideally even they're kind of automatically applied, or even more ideally there's a switch that says like try and automatically apply these, or let me know if I need to do anything. Basically software is 100 times easier to build, right? You're not constant, like you are constantly in a state of flow because the application doesn't require you actually to page out to go and grab some sort of documentation or figure out why the key is wrong for your YAML config, or figure out something here, right? And just as a result of like, if we can build that engine, we think that we can make software developers like 100 times more efficient, right? And this is why like, venture people are like, why would you work on this problem? And my answer is, why would you work on any other problem, right? Like if you could build this thing, this like weird engine thing that we are currently building and seems to go reasonably well so far, you can go build all the stuff you want to build later faster, right? And if you can build this and magic thing, you can just do that, right? And so that's kind of what it looks like for us, is that you don't need to deal with dependency, you don't need to deal with config, you don't need to deal with how these things land, you don't need to deal with Docker files, you don't need to understand how like the Linux file system is structured to deploy your React app.
That's awesome. So it like everybody agrees that it's a hard problem. Do you like have any problems in it that you're kind of like just putting off? You're like, we can solve that one later, and it's like the barrier to this big vision.
Yeah, it's well, so the IP problem that I sort of just like talked about, like we calculate that that's going to be a problem in 6 years, right?
Man.
And so it's like one of those things where you're like, which problems can I put off? Which fires are currently unput offable? How do we need to like change these things so that we can like make sure that these things work, right? And so I don't know if you know the gif of like I think it's from Wallace and Gromit, of like the guy putting down the train tracks all the time, or whatever. That's just us constantly, right? Like, and so whether it's like how do you scale the logger so that it's durable and like fault tolerant and like works across all of these instances, and the users can tail logs like in real time, right? Like our initial kind of like implementation, we're like, okay, well, we'll use BigQuery. It's like, well, BigQuery actually is not like in real time, so we can't actually use that, right? And so we had to like build this whole engine kind of around this thing, right? And so a lot of these problems, like they always just tie back to like, what is the product experience that you want out of this stuff, right? And I think that's why we're like uniquely positioned, or like people feel like the thing is kind of magic, is because like we really approach it from like a product perspective, and it's like, how do we make sure that like the product is there from the user experience, right? And then work backwards to like build the infrastructure that kind of is required for that.
So, as a first-time founder, or what I assume is a first-time founder, was it hard to get Railway off the ground? Did you immediately go for the venture capital route, or did you try to bootstrap for a while? Like, what was your strategy around this?
So I like this one's tough because like I was basically like, you can't really bootstrap this because Amazon is gonna murder you with capital. And so it was basically one of those things where it's like, it's kind of really you can only really do this via the venture route, if that makes sense, right? And I only sort of came to this realization maybe 6 to 9 months in. I was like, oh, we could raise an angel round, we could like do that, and we could like try and figure out a way to like monetize this right out of the gate. But we ended up kind of just like leaning to the venture side. And like I really do genuinely just believe that like it wouldn't be a business that you could build bootstrapped, because it does require like capital investment, tech investment, like working with users, like building the DX, like messing something up and then realizing that you just had like built a fundamental mistake that you now have to backfill, like a bunch of those things, right? And that's the only way you can do it, especially if you didn't want to spend like you know hundreds of years working on this problem, right? Like you could do it over time and anything like that in theory in a vacuum, right? But like only got like what 25 to like 35 years of like good work engineering kind of deal, right? And so that's kind of like the best fit for that. In terms of like getting it off the ground, I didn't want to build this thing. And I tell this to people often and they're like, but you are building the thing. And I'm like, yes, it's funny how that happens. I went to everybody smart who I knew at big companies and I was like, you guys must be building an easy way to like spin up databases and kind of like do infrastructure and all of this stuff, right? I won't like name any sort of like names or anything like that, but most of them were just like, no, we have like no interest in doing a lot of this stuff, right? But what they did say was like, this sounds really cool. Could we write you like a small angel check or whatever, right? And so I chatted with like a bunch of people, and at the end of this, I had like a bunch of no's for like, can you have a job offer, but like a bunch of angel checks, and I was like, okay, like let's just see where it goes on a lot of this stuff, right? And so I think I just like fundamentally was extremely lucky on a lot of these things, right? That's just kind of how it went down. I think we started like probably at the best time you could ever start for a dev tools company. Vercel was just like absolutely ripping on a lot of this stuff. GitHub had just been acquired basically. And so I think there was a lot of like luck and timing that kind of went into it, you know? And I still think there is to this day, right? Like I keep saying that like we're probably building this too early, but it's also probably going to take longer than we'd like. So we'll probably be on time. And that's kind of the current state.
Yeah, that definitely feels right. You know, it's interesting. I think we take this for granted. There are like some companies that I know of, like so Spotify has this thing called Backstage, which is their like internal like application development platform.
Yep.
And they've spent, you know, a lot of engineering resources on that. They have this semi open source project for it, but it's like, you know, it's work, right? But even for them, it's like, here's our like happy path. This is the things that we really, really are good at deploying. And this is like what you get. And sort of outside of this, you're on your own. And a lot of companies are like that. It's like, we're really good at like deploying Rails apps. We'll deploy your Rails app. You want to build something else, deploy it yourself. And then I think there's just this whole ecosystem of like startups that are like, all right, crap, Vercel's not really working for us because we need something that's more than serverless. And there's like Render and Heroku. Like Heroku's not the golden tool it used to be, and Render is great, and there's like these other things, but there's just a lot of stuff out there, and you're just like really wanting to build your app, build your product. So it's like I do think it's like a really good time where there's like not a clear like this is the tool to go to in this space.
Yeah. I think like if you look at any of the like stuff that gets shared by like VCs about like what the market looks like, you have like 400 tools that exist all in the same space that are kind of just like they do like there's like monitoring analytics and like deployment plane and like all of this other stuff, right? And I really like the like philosophy that like the Tailscale people have, and Avery talked about it in their most recent blog post, is like most people don't need that level of config, right? And if they do, you can go build it later, right? And so what's kind of like the thinnest line that you can draw to like get to that scale that you're like, okay, cool, this will work for like, you know, this specific set of users, right? Like Railway right now works really, really well for like indie hackers to like Series C, Series D startups, and like probably for internal tools at like Fortune 500 and like the Ubers and DoorDashes of the world. Like that's a sweet spot, right? And over time we'll like build out a lot of those things, but like I think there's a lot of tool fatigue that kind of generally goes around, and like there's a lot of like wonderful tools for a lot of these things, and you can also just add them to your application. But like, what if you had like a really, really good experience kind of just out of box on this, and you could go and put on whatever else you wanted, right? And AWS as it stands is not that, and Docker as it stands, God bless the technical stuff in there, the user experience is not that.
Yeah. Just trying to read the Amazon's docs. Oh my God. it's I pull hair out every time. With all the stuff you've built, you're relying on a lot of open source stuff. Have you guys contributed any open source libraries, like, or is it all secret sauce at this point?
So the Nixpack stuff is all open source, right? And so anybody can go in and add a provider. Anybody can go in and add any sort of base level dependencies. Anybody can add anything to the Rust build manager that kind of exists there. And a couple other things. We originally like started to do our own build packs, but that's what kind of like plopped out the Nixpack stuff. So we were hosting that for a while. It was like an extension of like the Paquito build packs. We've open sourced this OG generator, which is kind of like allows you to build like dynamic OGs. I think it's actually like forked but added on top of like something that Vercel built. We have this thing called dev icons, which is basically like if you go to just dev icons/dev-icons.railway.app/ whatever the query is, it'll come up with like whatever the icon is. So if you just like put go or anything like that, you just get the icon. And so this is super useful for just like going and getting like, nice PNGs and nice SVGs and like anything like that. And so over time, I'd like to open source a lot more of this stuff. So yeah.
That's cool. So, you, from what I've read on your blog and through this company, have an intense interest in automation. What parts of software development, other than what you've been working on, or even in the wider world, do you think are ripe for innovation that just haven't been automated yet?
I don't know if it's haven't been automated yet, but there's something between Vercel and Squarespace. There's something absolutely ginormous between Vercel and Squarespace that I don't think anybody has hit on yet. And I think it looks a lot like being able to define your own component kit and like go and like put it into a nice little kind of amalgam and start layering these things together, right? And I think the e-commerce stuff that Shopify is doing in kind of this area is like probably one of the closest things that I've generally seen. But I think that space is like, there was kind of a whole like push towards that in like the early 2010s, and I think it's gonna like make a resurgence because like I don't think that there's enough coverage, if that makes sense. In terms of other automations, I'm a big like home automation person. And so I have like smart blinds and like lights and other stuff. I have an 8 sleep that I like absolutely adore. I think one of the like really, really cool things that I don't think will come soon, but you're seeing like sort of inklings of it is like biometric feedback loops. So if you look at things like Aura, if you like look at things like 8 sleep, if you look at the things like levels where you just like pin a like CGM or anything like that, I want to be able to pull like all that data from my body because I want to basically know like if I have given it too much caffeine or not enough water or anything like that, right? And so that's the automation I think a lot about, right? Like this magic thing that can kind of just speak to your lizard brain and be like, hey, listen, you need to work out now because like that's going to bring your levels in line, right? And so for those things, like that's where I'm really, really excited about. And I suspect they might take long enough that we can get Railway off the ground and working super well. Maybe we could use it to like go build some of those things, but it might also be, it might take us a little while.
Yeah. Yeah, both those spaces are pretty cool right now. Like the website builder space, we've had lots of people on that are hitting that niche right now. Builder.io is an interesting one to me because like they are in this kind of the same vein of like, let's just build a bunch of crazy tech and see if it works. We had Steve Sewell, their CEO, on a few episodes ago. It was a good talk. Yeah. And then with the biometric stuff, oh my God, like if I could have a device that tells me my calories in, calories out, oh my God.
It would work. It would be great. And so, yeah, I'm excited about that. Tools for like security and like network automation where like, I really like Tailscale. I really like WireGuard in general. And I think it's like fantastic. Tools where you like can't shoot yourself in the foot, right? So those like dependency and supply chain management things, I think like one just like raised an absolute bajillion dollars. I think it's like Chain Guard or something with that. Managing all of that stuff and supply chain attacks and any of those things is super cool too, because there's a lot of effort that goes into it. And there's also a lot of entropy in that space, right? Because like, what does an exceptional security person look like? There's such a spread on that. Like I have met, like we have one of our investors who's like one of the best security people like I've ever met, hands down, I would say probably in the world. And the amount of expertise they have is just bananas, right? It's just like understands like all of the low level like Linux stuff, like far beyond, like is so far ahead on a lot of this stuff. And so if you can automate a lot of this and make it basically bulletproof by default, that's insane, right? And it might not be like conventional kind of automation, but I think it's just automation in terms of like, otherwise you'd have to have a daemon that kind of does all of these things, or some sort of person or whatever.
Yeah, definitely in the same vein of things I don't want to do as a front-end developer, security and infrastructure.
Yeah, and they're both critical.
They're both critical, and
yeah, that and like privacy concerns, like there's so much. Yeah. I've been looking through the starter projects that Railway has. I'm like, hey, what is this? I've never heard of this thing before.
Yeah, there's some cool stuff there, especially when you like start giving the community the autonomy to just like start publishing shit, because they just add a Railway button to it and it just gets like pulled in and you're like, what is this? And you're like, oh, this is really cool. Like, who did this, right?
Yeah.
So it's neat. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the I love that bit of DX from Heroku where it's just like, here's a button in your README, click it and things go. Like that's such a great thing to copy.
Yep. And yeah, we definitely can't take credit for it, but we're really excited about like expanding on it, right? And pulling in all of those things and having them in one place where you can just like have a marketplace that kind of just like manages all those dependencies for you. And it's all open source, right? And our ideal over time is actually we can monetize this for people, right? And so when people pay us to go and run these things, we can kick back money. And we already do for, a few repositories where people have kind of like developed a little bit of a kind of like running water tread kind of thing. Traffic's the word I'm looking for. It's a long day.
That's super cool. So like SaaS without like having to care about it too much.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just like, passive SaaS, if that makes sense. Right. And then ideally, if you can build these things and you can start monetizing them, like people could maybe like leave their jobs in a way that doesn't actually have to, force them to like go the venture back route. Right. And I think venture like is really awesome. And I think it gets like a relatively bad rap because I think like the ability to unlock those entrepreneurs to go like swing at those really, really hard problems is like cannot be like understated, overstated as like how important it is to like go and do those things. I am beyond lucky that people let us like go and do all of the shit that we do. That said, if we can enable people to like go and bootstrap and like go and scale from like their weekend job, like getting a really nice like deployment plane, sharing this with people, going and monetizing this and spinning this up without actually having to like go and take a lot of this risk, go and learn a lot of the like financial instrumentation that comes with like figuring out what kind of the terms on your term sheet are, especially as we go into like less favorable terms. You're going to have to figure out what liquidation preferences, you're going to have to figure out what ratchets are, you're going to have to figure out what all these things are, right? And then it comes with like the having to do like all of the stuff to run a business, right? Like the reason we started this company is so that I could work on like really, really cool eng problems. And now we're at a point where I'm just recruiting people to go work on the really cool eng problems that I wanted to work on. And I'm like, and not that there's anything wrong with that. It's really, really cool to just like get people who are like awesome to like go and do that. But for the people who are technologists at heart and just like want to like work, like just like the amount of effort that they want to do. I grew up reading Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Work Week. And so I'm a big fan of a lot of that stuff. It's just like, having both options there is really, really key.
Let's move into Tooltips.
Okay.
So I'd sort of put Actual as a pick for a few reasons. One, so Actual is a budgeting app. It's by James Longster. Think I got that right? Yep. It's actually open source now. He's stopped maintaining the project. It was a sort of a solo dev thing. I've had my eye on this project for a while because he's written a lot of good technical content on it. He's got some blog posts up. It's local first. He actually wrote this library called Absurd SQL, which is this SQLite binding and WebAssembly that runs in the browser that like uses IndexedDB as its storage engine. So it's like this really, really awesome project. There's a lot of interesting tech here. The user experience is pretty good. And now it's open source. So if you are really interested in learning how to build a local first app, this is a great model, and definitely highly recommend you check it out. The code is really, really interesting. But yeah, it just kind of cool and very fortuitous that it open sourced. I don't know.
Yeah.
Awesome opportunity to learn.
That's super sweet. I'm like very bullish on the local first stuff. Unfortunately, it's very hard to build. There's a couple of things like I think it's called Replicache or something like that. Yeah. Super cool.
Partnered with Replicache several times.
Yeah. So I think it's awesome, right? It's just really hard to pull off. Like I know that the Linear guys spent a really long time building their engine out to go and power a lot of their experience. And it shows, obviously. It's like world-class software, but it's still, you need the chops to write world-class software. And I haven't seen a library that basically just gives it you off the shelf for kind of like free.
Yeah, so there's like Replicache, and there's another company called LiveBlocks.
Yep.
So there's more and more that are coming into this multiplayer space where if you like don't want to focus on this, I really like Elixir LiveView as a potential way to do that. It's just like from a technology perspective, It's a really interesting model.
Yep.
But yeah, so there's a lot of services out here to sort of start layering these things into your app. If that's the thing that you want to do. But if you want to learn how CRDTs work, you want to try to go the real technical route and build it yourself, look at actual source code. It's good.
Yeah. Cool. That's sweet. I didn't even realize there was like an open source implementation that you got to look at. So I'll have to go dig into that.
I'm going off the rails here a little bit, but there's also a really, really good paper by the team behind the Muse app. Well, it was their UX research.
The Ink and Switch people.
Ink and Switch.
Their blog is just like pour overable. Like read it n times.
It's golden. Yeah. They've got a really good like real-time article like post on like studying CRDTs and understanding how like multi-user text editing works. And they also have a library, a CRDT library that's written in JavaScript or whatever that's really good. And I don't remember what that is off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, the I think it's Project Cambia or something like that. It's about like creating lenses for all of your data so that it's constantly like portable and reconcilable. Is super super neat. Yeah.
Okay, my first tooltip is a framework I just found yesterday called Plasmo. What Plasmo is like it's Next.js for browser extensions. If you've ever created a browser extension before,
Oh, thank God.
yeah, there's lots of different files and lots of different configs and lots of weird knowledge that you have to know how to make it like just right. The approach of Next.js for browser extensions has me really excited because like Next.js made it like very simple to spin up a React app and have it nice and tidy. Hopefully Plasmo can do the same with browser extension development because that is a slog.
Yes, absolutely. I'm gonna go star that right now. Okay, cool. So this seems to be a way more polished version of something I tried to do really poorly a few years ago. And it was basically just like, why can't I use my like design system in React Native and on the web? And it turns out there's a lot of problems with it. So I'm glad that they did it because I went down the rabbit hole for like a couple of weekends and then I just quit. So the people at Expo as well as the people at Tamagui, shout out to y'all. You doing really, 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 really hard stuff. So it's super, super neat to see on a lot of these things. I think we just like need better tools for like cross-platform development in all of these kind of categories.
I too tried to do this and found it challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not something that you would expect. You're like, oh yeah, I can make a mono repo. We got two React things. Like, why can't I render one React and another React? And yeah, not possible. But it's very interesting. I wonder how it works under the hood.
Yeah, I have not had the time to kind of like dig into it, but it does seem like the level of sorcery and the level of kind of like product/DX that you'd want out of this. So like pretty interesting. It's really nice.
Yeah, you got to do a lot to make it like nice for both platforms.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's really cool.
Especially if you have types.
Yeah. Okay, so next one we're gonna do. I don't know how to say it. SQFMI.
Oh yeah. Well, you don't have to mention the brand. There is this, I think it's open source watch. It's an e-ink, e-paper watch, whatever. It's pretty cheap actually. They have like case design, so you can 3D print your own case. I was a huge fan of the Pebble when the Pebble was around. I loved the Pebble watch. It was an e-ink watch and it was super great. One of my favorite pieces of hardware. Unfortunately, they went out of business or they got acquired and basically shut down by Fitbit, I think. But this watch I've had my eye on for a little while. So it is all open source. You can write your own watch faces for it. It's relatively simplistic in that the watch face is like the whole watch, right? Like, so the software running for the watch face is like everything. But anyway, I'm really tempted to buy one. It's like I said, it's relatively cheap. I think I'm pretty sure it's under $100. I don't remember the price off the top of my head.
Yeah, this is one geeky looking watch. It looks like a circuit board strapped to your wrist.
Yeah.
You can definitely do cases and stuff too,
Yeah.
like, to customize it.
I'd be worried I'd get shocked or something.
Yeah.
Is that just me? like how insulated is that? What looks like to me metal pieces? I don't know.
Yeah,
$60.
That's not
$60.
bad.
That's
$60.
Makes you question whether you're gonna get shocked or not. It's $60. Nah, it's cool. I love stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's got Bluetooth, it's got Wi-Fi, it's got a vibration motor on it, all your buttons, like, got an accelerometer, you can track your steps. I mean, it's kind of cool. Like,
I don't know. Like the thing I want from my smartwatch is not for it to tell me the time, and like it seems like it probably doesn't do much past that.
Well, you have to write it. That's the trick. If it's something you feel like hacking, this is good for you. If it's not, just stick with your consumer grade. You'll be fine.
Okay, so my last tooltip of the week is Lion web components. What Lion is it's basically Reach/Radix, but for web components. I wanted to build this out a while ago, but I don't use web components, so it didn't really make sense for me to do that. But like, I just love seeing projects like this that make it easier and easier to create accessible experiences, and that type of development can come to web components too is awesome. I haven't looked at the code too much, but they have a bunch of stuff that could get you started. And yeah, that's it.
Very nice. I like how this is it. The Rock from Lion King. Is that what that?
I think that is what that is.
There you go. That's what it is. Cool. All right. I'm going to go with the GraphQL Nexus and TRPC stuff. And this is kind of like more on the like building APIs that like don't suck to use. And so these are really, really awesome tools that allow you to essentially like get types in all of your APIs, right? And so the way that Railway kind of works for our API stuff is we actually have these GraphQL clients that generate, they hook in with Prisma, GraphQL Nexus, and I think there's another tool in there that allows you basically, you define like the permissions as like middleware. It's great. You get types end to end. Everything is generated, and then the resolvers can go and call kind of like those like gRPC microservices if you want, right? And it's really, really amazing. It's like deny by default on all of this stuff, but if you want to expose like model properties, it's super easy to like hook in any of these things. You just do like t.model.name of field, and it will just like pass the types straight to the front end, like allow you to access that property of the model. But by default, it will only give you kind of like the UUID or whatever you're kind of exposing there, right? So I think this is just like phenomenal. These are tools that I really, really like from just like doing stuff faster, right? Like we've all like tried to debug like a REST endpoint and spent 30 minutes and then realizing that your shit just didn't serialize to JSON correctly. And then you like go and just like take a walk around the park. Tools like this make it so that you just don't have to do that. And that's always great in my books, you know?
Yeah. And then the other one you shared, TRPC, that's a good one too. We had the guy who runs the project on a while back.
We had the creator on 2 episodes ago, right?
Oh yeah, and we had the creator on 2 episodes ago.
Yeah, it's super cool. I was like having a look at it, and I was like, maybe we could integrate it here, but like I am not really doing much coding anymore, unfortunately. So I'm just gonna let the people do whatever they want to do in there, and not just like pop in and be like, oh hey, should we rebuild our API layer? You know?
Yeah. You got to create work as a CEO, and that's a great way to do it.
The work creates itself. So I'm just, sitting there being like, find more people to like go backfill the work when I'm not creating work,
Me and Justin are out of tooltips, but you got one more left. And we talked about it a little bit.
We talked about it a little bit. And I think they changed their slogan recently because of like a tweet or something. I feel like that occurred, but maybe it was a fever dream. Anyway, Tailscale, maybe I should get paid for this. Tailscale is like a really easy to use VPN, and like you wouldn't get excited about it, except it's like really, really cool for underlying tech. And it's like, it is frustratingly simple. You literally just curl a binary onto a fucking box and you log in. I'm sorry, I don't know if I can swear on this, but you can leave it out. Yeah, you curl it onto that box and then it just works. You just log in and then it does all the network stuff, and it's bonkers. It's like, there's no other way to describe it other than it's bonkers. It's like all secure by default. You can't possibly like mess these things up. And then you can go and define ACLs later for access control. It is frustratingly simple. They've done just a phenomenal job in building this thing. So it's super cool. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. They have a really generous free tier, and then you can go bring it to your company, and that's how their business model works. And apparently it's going super well because they just raised a boatload of money. But yeah.
Yeah, they're super good. I like that there's an Oxide call out on their site.
There is.
I feel included. Andrew, I actually did have one tooltip. It was the first one on there.
You shared that
Space
already.
Oh,
you shared that.
Okay,
we can reshare it if you want, but we did.
No,
it's
okay.
He shared it previously on a
previous episode.
Yeah,
I'm actually bad about this, about forgetting.
Just like bringing the back. I think it's really cool. I haven't
It's fine.
dived into it. Does it work?
You should definitely look at it.
Like, I feel like it's super cool. I'm gonna have to try and like get it working at some point, but it's like very, very neat. It's like that kind of like
cool.
Yeah,
it's very, very neat.
Definitely check it out. It's a fun project.
Cool.
That wraps it up for the episode. Thanks for coming on, Jake. This conversation was way out of my wheelhouse, but it was fun to talk about it regardless.
Yeah, and that's the ideal, is we can make all the out of the wheelhouse stuff really easy, and then you don't have to deal with it, and then you can be like, oh, not my wheelhouse, not my problem,
Beautiful.
Yeah. You don't have to understand it to be excited about it. So
Definitely.
I'm excited.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful. Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of DevTools FM. Be sure to follow us on YouTube and wherever you consume your podcasts. Thanks for listening.